The worst moment of my life was also the most important one, because it changed who I was forever. This moment was back when I was 19 years old, and my two best friends at the time decided they wanted to take acid that autumn day. I opted out and became the trip sitter only because I had done it the night before. All of us were desperately trying to numb ourselves with all sorts of chemicals back then. I watched as my two friends put the 2 tabs of acid underneath their tongues, and the day began. And the day began very calmly. We were skateboarding over bridges, and we were in nature, and they were telling me they could see the trees breathing, and I was laughing at them because I knew exactly what they were talking about. I noticed one of my friends becoming subtly paranoid, but it wasn't until the sun set that things took a dark turn. That friend's paranoia became worse, so I drove all 3 of us to a quiet residential area with a park in it, and the 3 of us sat on a bench and talked until that friend began spilling his true emotions. He began confessing that he wants to end his life, that he needs to end his life to escape the torture he feels about himself and the world. I had never seen this side of my friend before, and at this point, I was friends with him for a couple of years, but I guess I never really knew what was going on deep down. This began freaking out my other friend, and so he went out for a walk on his own, understandably leaving me to take care of our friend who was clearly having a bad trip. A simple bad trip is what I thought at the time, but things got more serious. He began pleading with me, asking me to smash his head in with a rock or drown him in the pond. And as I told him that I wasn't going to end his life, he became visibly frustrated. He began yelling that sounded more like crying, and he punched me in his distress, but he seemed to be hurting more than me. He began taking off his clothes to jump into the pond to put an end to his agony, but that was the moment I saw the last thing me or my friend would want to see. Blue and red lights blaring on the top of a Ford Explorer. The neighbors had called the cops. An officer walked out of the car and asked me what was going on. I explained to the officer that my friend was suicidal and that he was unstable at the moment and that I need to take him home. And he said okay, and I began walking him to the car, but we were surrounded. 5 more cops had pulled in. We had 5 cop cars surrounding us with all of their lights on, and this wasn't helping the deteriorating mind of my friend, and he collapsed immediately. 10 or so cops walked out and surrounded us, and they commanded my friend to get the fuck up. And I explained to the officers again the situation, and I lifted my friend up, and I was trying to guide him through the gang of officers, but that was when he made a sudden movement. The officers said that he had reached for one of their guns. Looking back, I believe that he did that to use on himself. Immediately, he was tackled to the ground, and the 10 officers, all 6 foot, 200 pounds, began beating my friend with batons and tasing him multiple times. And he collapsed once again, and his face began to drip with blood. I watched as more officers rushed in to join in on the beating of the helpless kid, and at that moment I realized that I was about to witness the execution of my friend right in front of my eyes. In desperation, I grabbed one of the officer's shoulders, pleading with him, telling them that they were going to kill him, and immediately I got tackled to the ground, and I got beat in the face multiple times until my nose was broken. That's why I still wear this thing. I put my hands up in the air and I told him that I wasn't resisting, but I looked into the officer's eyes and I realized that he had already lost complete control. There was nothing but instinct behind those eyes. He began slandering me with racial slurs and continued his frenzy. I realized that I wasn't going to get through to him, so I fought back, but being a skinny teenager back then, I had no chance. I got handcuffed and it pained me to watch the officers continue to beat and tase my already helpless friend. At this point, his face was completely red with blood. I spent the night in the holding cell at the station that night, and my friend got sent to the emergency room. At the station, I made the heartbreaking phone call to my father at 3 a.m. and thanks to a lawyer, my friend and I barely avoided jail time. While I was in that cell, I realized that this was the biggest wake-up call I had ever received. It felt as though the thrills and highs of doing drugs and committing crimes, getting into trouble, and rebelling for years was finally coming to a crashing halt. We thought we were invincible, but reality had finally caught up to us and struck us down cold. The reality that we were helpless, powerless, and lost teenagers. We weren't the unstoppable teenagers that we thought we were. And when my parents picked me up from the station with tears in their eyes as they saw the bloodied face of their son, is when I realized that I needed to make a change in my life.